Is Donald Trump capable of dropping anything else other than the F-bomb?
This kind of very, very hyperbolic rhetoric language is something that maybe behind closed doors you'd have heard in the past.
Some people call it, put it on a pressure cooker on fire and keep the fire low so that the person cannot take any decision. They are inside the pressure cooker, but the lid is not off. Lid can be off when the president decides to take the lid off.
Taliban that was fighting America in Afghanistan that once said, well, you have the watches, but we have the time.
He's desperate. He started off, he thought that he will take the war in a certain direction. That has not happened because of the Iranian pushback.
Know the value of the human being, and also they have always been friendly with the people of the world.
Where is this heading to? Was the US planning a ground invasion on that day? Because Mr. Trump was still saying, I have a deadline, and he's now, as I said, extended that deadline.
His cabinet ministers, if you see, that they are mostly becoming yes men or yes women, because if they know that if they go anywhere against the wishes of the president, then they might be out of the cabinet very soon.
Hello and welcome. You're watching me, Sanket Upadhyay, on The Federal. The show is called AI with Sanket. This is the AI of news, because news in India today requires not artificial but analytical intelligence. On this Monday morning, we are going to start AI with Sanket with a tweet from Donald Trump, where he has bucked all traditional requirements of international diplomacy, of being kind and polite. Diplomacy by its very nature means that you say the harshest of things in the politest of manner. Donald Trump does not believe in this, and we know it. So, in his message, he used profanities. In his message, he used the F word. In his message, he said all sorts of things, F word, B word, all sorts of words. But the point is, this also shows Donald Trump and America's desperation. They started the war, and once again in world history, America does not know how to come out of a war, come out victorious of the war, because that is a precondition for any American president. Or else how will they explain what was the motive behind going to war? Now the problem is, with Donald Trump not listening to advice of his own NATO partners, other colleagues in his cabinet, and choosing to increase the rhetoric with each passing day. Can you just ignore these statements as theater? Or is he capable of doing something far more dangerous? He has used the F word in a tweet. Can he use the N word on the ground just to emerge victorious? America has done this in the past. But can you ignore Donald Trump, who's desperate to appear victorious, appear the victor in this war with Iran? Let's put this to a short discussion. All right, joining us right now on this discussion is Mr. Shashank, who is a former Foreign Secretary. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. And we also have Suhasini Haidar, senior journalist, who we have had the pleasure of speaking to on a number of occasions. And isn't this an interesting time? I would like to begin with you, Mr. Shashank, and want to ask you, in your career as a diplomat, as an IFS officer, as someone who has been posted to very many countries, as someone who has served as the Foreign Secretary, have you ever come across a situation where the president of one of the most powerful countries in the world chooses to use the choicest of French on different public platforms to explain himself?
Well, I think point is that the language, American language, is becoming more flowery. Perhaps it was not like that earlier. And the presidents normally read out from the prepared briefs. I think here I'm finding that this president, of course, he takes the briefs from his experts, but then he puts his own inputs because he feels that he is more knowledgeable and he has to take the final decision. He has the responsibility to leave a legacy of being one of the best presidents of the United States ever. So I think with that kind of a background, we are finding that President Trump is making his own inputs into the final decision making. And his cabinet ministers, if you see, that they are mostly becoming yes men or yes women, because if they know that if they go anywhere against the wishes of the president, then they might be out of the cabinet very soon. As we have seen, not with the cabinet ministers, but we have seen with some of the senior army officers and some others. And in the last term also, I think there are many people who had been sent out. And from between the first and second term, several of his previous advisors are now have-beens. They are not any longer under his in his close circles.
Suhasini Haidar, what does this say about the American control or the lack of it of the war? How do you read this message from Donald Trump?
Firstly, Sanket, one has to remember that presidential sort of communications have never been so direct in the past, in the sense that here you can clearly tell if you're using what's being called in newspaper parlance, as you said, French or the F-bomb, if you're using this kind of profanity in your messaging, it actually just means that it is Mr. Trump who is putting these out. Whether he's dictating them or writing them himself, this is him, because nobody else would do this on somebody else's behalf. Secondly, I think one has to remember that what it brings to the fore is perhaps quiet arrogance that has always been there, which has been quiet and not so quiet at different times. After all, Richard Armitage is supposed to have said to President Musharraf or to his cabinet that if you don't support us post 9/11, if you don't support us in our invasion of Afghanistan, we will blow you back to the bomb you back to the Stone Ages. So this kind of very, very hyperbolic rhetoric language is something that maybe behind closed doors you'd have heard in the past. Even Richard Armitage didn't say it out in the open. Here you have a situation where the president is directly putting it on social media. So I think the first thing to remember is that what you're seeing is perhaps how people speak, but we've never had this kind of direct communication. The second, I think, has to be that this is not going well. That no matter what happened in the past month, 5 weeks or so, it is not according to Mr. Trump's schedule. So if you see his various public statements from the beginning, when he was talking really about saving the Iranians from their own regime, to today putting this deadline, which he has now extended a little bit because he's now tweeted Tuesday, 8 p.m. EST. Now, whether that means that's when he'll start bombarding Iran, or whether that is the deadline after which he will decide what to do, I'm not really sure. But because he said that, the fact is that this keeps changing, and it does seem as if it's not going to schedule, even though they have what they have crafted together, a very, very powerful winning narrative on what happened with the two pilots that bailed into Iran. We're not sure how much truth there is, but certainly the US is claiming that they have been able to take their people out without any casualties after what can only be imaginably a very, very difficult couple of days for any army invading to realize that their planes had been shot down. But according to even conservative estimates, they've lost a lot of their aircraft there.
Mr. Shashank, do you think that Donald Trump clearly, with what we are discussing over here and what one gets to see, he's desperate. He started off, he thought that he will take the war in a certain direction. That has not happened because of the Iranian pushback. My point is Donald Trump capable of dropping anything else other than the F-bomb? What if this were to be, as he threatens, the N-bomb or any other letter bomb?
It's a dangerous situation. For a very long time, the Americans, presidents, have been trying very hard to show that they're really very manly, macho people, and they can take the decision which only Americans can take. And I mean, what they perhaps feel is that very small countries of Europe like Spain and France and UK, they have been running their colonial empires for centuries. And here is the greatest country in the world, which has the best brains from all over India, all over the world, and they are not able to do it. So I think that is something which is really galling for the US president all along. And we have seen that happen, that whether it is a democratic government or a Republican government, wherever they find the natural resources which can go into the hands of their rivals, that they try to make sure that they do not fall into the hands of the rivals, and they should be kept under some kind of a control, whether what some people call it, put it on a pressure cooker on fire and keep the fire low, so that the person cannot take any decision. They are inside the pressure cooker, but the lid is not off. Lid can be off when the president decides to take the lid off, as they had done in Afghanistan, they had done that in Vietnam, and many other places in the West Asian region. I have myself been in at least 2 theaters. I was in Hanoi in Vietnam in 1972-73. Most of the times I was running to the shelter, but I found that the Vietnamese people had said, look, these people have no business to come here thousands of kilometers away from their mainland in order to control our oil resources. Or they said, look, we have fought against the Chinese for 10,000 years. So how are we going to give in to these people, French or Japanese or the Americans? I think the same thing I found in Libya, which was very friendly to the Americans. In fact, most friendly of the Arab governments I found, that they were all Libyan people were hoping that somehow America would treat them as a normal country. And in the meantime, they were handing over their very sweet light crude oil to Italy, to France, to other countries. But they really wanted to have a good relationship with the USA. But somehow USA was taken in, like this time, by the Israelis. At that time, it was taken in by the French and the Italians, and they bombed Libya, which has now been broken into several small tribal territories. And Vietnam, of course, came back. The Americans had to leave Vietnam with great difficulty. I think the last few soldiers hanging from the shoes of a helicopter. Now, Afghanistan, they did not do that, but they left all their $80 billion worth of equipment in Afghanistan in the hope that they will go back there. Like the way the British thought, Churchill said that he will come back to India after some time, because the Indians are men of straw and they would never be able to control this country. And they, for good measure, they made Pakistan a military state. And so we always had this rivalry between people who had fought together in the First World War and Second World War and lost almost 100,000 people in both wars together. I mean, not together, 200,000 in both of them. Here we were fighting with each other. And this is very good for the West, because they know that any war takes place in the world scene, Indians and Pakistanis have to sacrifice their lives because others will run away. Americans have already written there a lot of books that the British, French, and the others, they lost all the wars. And then they would go and request the Americans to help them. And the Americans would then come in. And then, of course, the bright and the very hardworking soldiers, especially from South Asia and from Africa and elsewhere, then they would be used as the human beings and they would be taken for this measure. So this is what I feel, that America has tried it all along, with irrespective of the governments in power. Now we are saying that there is a tiredness in American public. And I remember Vietnamese leaders telling me in the 70s that their greatest promoters and their greatest partners were the American mothers, the American sisters, who insisted that their sons and brothers will not go and fight 15, 20,000 kilometers away and die. And that is what is likely to happen in the United States. Of course, the Americans have the other alternative, that they will tell the Ukrainians, they will tell all kinds of people, say, okay, you will get the American citizenship, just go and fight on our behalf, and within 2-3 months, if you survive, you get the American citizenship, which is a very highly coveted kind of a job, for which we know that many sports people have been also going from tennis area or from other fields.
Okay, Ms. Suhasini Haidar, just coming back to you, we have been seeing since the 28th of February what many are calling a series of bad decisions, some even calculated to help Donald Trump and his associates financially. However, for the country and for the world at large, bad decisions, right? How possible is it for Donald Trump to take a worst decision as well in this war? He keeps threatening. You see these threats over and over again. But here is the tricky situation. He may keep threatening. You may think that these are empty threats till such time that a worse decision is taken.
I agree with you, Sanket. I think it is an extremely worrying time because at some level, although people are finding it humorous to see what Mr. Trump is writing and, the spelling mistakes, the typos, the fact that he gets facts wrong, says the old Iranian president and the new Iranian president are different characters, but they're exactly the same. The truth is, I think for analysts, they have to look much more closely at the past to realize, a famous saying, I think it was Kissinger, but Ambassador Shashank would know more, that the Americans always do the right thing after all the wrong things have been exhausted, all the wrong options have been exhausted. And the fear is always not so much that the Americans go into a war planning to go to the limit, but that once that begins, what becomes important is to come away with a victory. And that victory becomes more and more elusive. Mr. Trump was reading out the time that various American armies had been at war, whether it was World War I to Vietnam, Afghanistan, and all the rest. And I was actually saying, what a sort of terrible analogy to make, because if he is talking in terms of, Afghanistan took 20 years and Vietnam took 13 years, then what is he actually trying to say over here? Is it just an empty threat that he's prepared to go on? Because we know that perfectly, we're talking about Mr. Trump as if he's an aberration. But every American president has had their own invasion, has had their own war, in the last 20, 25 years. How many have we seen? Mr. Obama and the war in Libya, and the beginnings of the war in Syria, Mr. Biden. There are so many different examples. The idea that, you were talking about, I think, the resilience and patience of the Vietnamese. If you remember, it was the Taliban that was fighting America in Afghanistan that once said, well, you have the watches, but we have the time. So it's a question of what point does the US get to where then there is a point of no return, that the only way they can return is by somehow saying we have a victory. Otherwise, they will leave it to the next president and the president after that until, this fatigue sets in and the mothers and of course, a lot of the mothers and sisters are now in combat themselves because times have changed. So armies have a lot of women as well in them. But the truth is that when we're looking at these kind of sort of threats being made, one has to be extremely worried about where this is leading. You made a reference to the N bomb in the past. The fact is there is only one country in the world that has used nuclear, an atomic bomb. And that country used it not once, but twice. So having seen the effect of one bomb, actually went ahead and did it again. It took decades to even deal with the immediate fallout of that. So I don't want to go much further in this because obviously, one can always be accused of being alarmist. But I think one has to remember that these decisions in the United States are made at an executive level. So when when this particular operation where we saw an E-15 or whatever plane, a fighter jet being shot down over Iran, and then it turns out that 4 or 5 planes were involved, some of them in rescue, some were standing on the ground, and then had to be destroyed by the leaving rescue planes. I think we have to ask, where is this heading to? Was the US planning a ground invasion on that day? Because Mr. Trump was still saying, I have a deadline, and he's now, as I said, extended that deadline. So we have to ask, where is the US seeing itself go? is it going to reach a point? And I think, the idea of boots on the ground, which so many presidents have tried to stay away from, and Mr. Trump, more than anyone else, has promised that he would never be sending America. The idea of the boots on the ground is an extremely dangerous escalation. But I think if the decision is taken that we have to win this war without boots on the ground, that could lead to an even more frightening escalation. So, as I said, I don't wish to go into an alarmist strain of conversation here, but I do think we need to ask if the United Nations counts for nothing as far as the United States goes, as none of their allies count for anything. They have not been able to dissuade Mr. Trump from what the US is doing, despite all these weeks, and of not just Spain and Ireland or Norway criticizing the US, but of close allies criticizing the US, the UK saying we really cannot be part of your operations. If no one is able to dissuade the United States, and within the United States, as Ambassador Shashank pointed out, the decision making is really coming down to one man, we have to really think about just how safe this situation is and where are the guardrails.
Let me ask you this question, Mr. Shashank. Where are the guardrails?
I don't think the allies of the United States or the other major powers like Russia, China, or others, budding powers like India, Brazil, who are trying to set up this BRICS as an active organization, they will be able to do much. I think the greatest factor could be Iran itself. And I think what Iran has done very cleverly in a civilizational manner, that they allowed the Americans to take away their airmen. And they also made some noises that even if they were arrested, they would have been treated humanely in Iran, because Iranians know the value of the human being, and also they have always been friendly with the people of the world, and they are a civilizational power. So I think that is one way that the Iranians can try to convey signals to the American decision makers, which can try to keep them away from what you are saying, the N-word. And the second is, of course, they are giving the threats also, like the President Trump is giving them threats that if their energy grids are attacked, then they would attack the energy grids and the water desalination grids in the Arab countries. And the Arab countries would then be telling the Americans, okay, look, please finish off in your own time, but not by using N1, which will be affecting the environment all over the region, and also would lead to a tremendous amount of mortality on the Arab side also. So I think while originally there might have been differences between Saudi Arabia and Iran, that Saudi Arabia was willing to go for the IMEC corridor, making normal relations with Israel, whereas Iran was not willing to do that. But now I think things have gone way beyond that. And Israelis have been able to get what they wanted. I think they have been able to extend their cordon sanitaire or their red lines in the southern part of Lebanon. And they have also been able to, they have suffered also tremendously by the attacks by the Iranians. So they know that whatever they say, 90% damage to the Iranian Navy and Air Force and their missile capability, but still Iranians would still have enough to damage the rivals like Israel and their neighbors in the Arab world. I think that is something which all of them have to take care of. So these are the two major guardrails, that is the Israelis and Arabs, neighbors of Iran, and Iran itself. And Iranian leadership has to keep sending the right signals so that as and when the war ends and diplomacy is brought in, then they are able to make sure and say that, okay, they took the right decision. They did not go in for the kind of extreme maximalist position and were not willing to move away from that.
Yeah, Ms. Suhasini Haidar, my final question, it is in no one's interest, it serves no one's interests for continuing the war, certainly not global economy. But hypothetically speaking, and in a world where perceived victories are tom-tommed more than the real ones, for each of the sides here, as Ambassador Shashank also mentioned, that Israel can say, look, we expanded our borders. America can say, look, we did this. What is there for Iran to claim over here with the help of which this war can come to an end? That fine, we've achieved our goal and now thus far and no further for us, unless we are provoked.
So obviously, so far, we have seen that the US has been involved in some way in trying to find that off-ramp. And, the talks had been going on, but every time the US said something about a ceasefire, what we heard from the Iranians is there's no question, we are not part of this. So what would it take? I honestly would say that while we don't know exactly how the regime is working right now, because as we know, they've had this change right at the top, whether it was the supreme leader Khamenei being assassinated or all his colleagues, his advisors who were assassinated with him, or it was the national security advisor Larijani being assassinated. We don't know how the thought process definitely, where the power balance is necessarily, but what we do have is this piece written by the former foreign minister and the chief negotiator Javed Zarif, in which he gives certain suggestions. One of them, Sanket, is the idea that you have some kind of a mutual non-aggression pact. That, okay, you are able to find an off-ramp in which Iran puts in writing some commitments, whether it comes to enrichment, whether they'll be willing to do that or not. But Mr. Zarif has certainly put himself out there by saying that this is a possibility in return for the fact that the US will, in fact, ceasefire, stop its attacks on Iran. But further down the line, that what you will need is some kind of a mutual non-aggression pact. Whether that will mean that also the US will have to backtrack on some of its bases, because the early reports seem to suggest that the US's embassies, the US's bases in the Gulf region have been made unlivable by a lot of the Iranian attacks. So, that is something that needs to be seen. And finally, as you pointed out, Israel can always play the kind of spoiler in this. And Mr. Zarif's article does not actually relate to what Israel would need to do. And they use, and they've used this period of uncertainty in this part of West Asia to their advantage in terms of making gains in South Lebanon, bombing Beirut, repeatedly occupying territory in South Lebanon up to the Litani River. So, or trying to do that, certainly. So it remains to be seen what Israel would be willing to accept. But I do think that if you actually have a ceasefire for the moment, that gives you space and time to work with. Whether that's enough or not, as I said, the initial problem is really going to be when the US feels it can convincingly walk away with a winning narrative. Because if it doesn't have that, we've seen with Afghanistan, they stayed far longer than anyone expected them to. From 2001, they finally pulled out in 2021. They left the Taliban back in charge just as they had taken Afghanistan. Perhaps the situation for women was even worse after the US withdrawal. And yet, it doesn't seem as if any lessons have been learned when it comes to trying to invade another country, no matter how poor that country is. And Iran is by no means helpless in this.
All right. Ms. Suhasini Haidar, Mr. Shashank, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much. Let's just hope we don't have to wait for another French-laden tweet or Truth Social from Donald Trump. But he's full of surprises, isn't he? Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Suhasini. Bye-bye.